innovative and globally competitive through our advocacy, consultancy, research, and technical assistance. And today, World Productivity Day is usually observed on the 20th of June, but today we are observing it on Friday, June 19th, to bring it to you, the people, so that you too can share and be a part of this event. Now, why celebrate a World Productivity Day? Now, this is not a Hallmark card event. It's not something that, like Mother's Day or Father's Day that's coming up, but it's really done in an effort to draw attention to the concept, to encourage the implementation of productivity tools, to propagate and enhance productivity, quality, competitiveness, and efficiency. Is everyone hearing me clearly? All right, so we are hoping from today's session that you will be able to get some valuable tools, tips, and advice where you too can be propagating or promoting quality, competitiveness, and efficiency. So with us this morning, we have a very esteemed panel who will be speaking under the theme, improving our productivity performance, working smarter, not harder. And our panelists today include our very own State Minister, the Honorable Zavia Mayne, of Minister of State and of the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. We have Ms. Gillian Corrodus with us, also from the Ministry of Labor. Mr. Douglas Orane, who is a friend of productivity, and Mr. Wayne Christopher Chen, who's also one of our ambassadors as it relates to productivity. Ms. Denique Ferguson, who is representing our IT space in terms of innovation and digitization, and Mr. Wendel Ivey, our very own research analyst in the Jamaica Productivity Center. So for today, what we're going to be doing is having a conversation on this topic of working smarter and not harder. And you will have the opportunity as our listeners and viewers to be a part of that conversation and ask questions. So please feel free to, in the comments, we have our technical support team who is on hand to capture those questions and to share them with us and the panel, which you would ask the panel these questions. So please feel free to send them in. And if we don't get to those questions today, then we will address them and ensure that you get those answers. But start us off, we'll have our State Minister, Minister Zavia Mayne, who is a Jamaican-born attorney at law, businessman, and member of Parliament for the constituency of South West St. Anne, to bring some opening remarks as we start off our discussion. Minister Mayne, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mrs. Nelson. Good morning, other members of the panelists. I want to recognize with us Honorable Douglas Orane, former Chairman and CEO of GraceKennedy Limited, Mr. Wayne Chen, our President of the Caribbean Employers Federation, Ms. Corrodus, Gillian Corrodus, Divisional Director of the Industrial Relations Department of the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, Mr. Wendel Ivey, Senior Research Analyst at the Jamaica Productivity Center, Ms. Denique Ferguson, Senior Service Designer at the SlashRoots Foundation. It is a great pleasure for me to be here, ladies and gentlemen, with you at this digital forum to celebrate World Productivity Day. This year's national theme, Working Smarter, Not Harder, is very fitting as it empowers us to maximize our thoughts and strategies to elevate our capacity during this period. Today is an important day on the ministry's calendar as it gives us a chance to thank the people and the companies who have made productivity possible and allow us the opportunity to acknowledge our accomplishments and reflect on where we have fallen short in terms of productivity, as we are well aware of how we can improve. I believe that increased productivity is essential for the Jamaican economy to grow and develop. It is a win-win situation for businesses as it allows more goods and services to be produced with less resources, which will result in greater efficiency and profit in the long run. I'm therefore encouraging everyone to start seeing productivity as something positive, and let us embrace productivity through innovation, training, and consultation. The Ministry of Labor and Social Security, through the Jamaica Productivity Center, has been instrumental in trying to improve productivity in Jamaica over the years. The JPC, which is the abbreviated for Jamaica Productivity Center, has been developing and implementing programs to assist individuals, companies, and firms to improve the things they do and the way things are done in order to optimize their efficiency and effectiveness. They have also been conducting sensitization sessions within organizations and schools, among other initiatives, in order to increase public awareness of the importance of productivity. Jamaica has a far way to go in terms of productivity, based on the statistics coming out of the Statistical Institute of Jamaica. Our economy depends heavily on our service industry. Currently, 72% of our GDP comes from the service sector, while on the other hand, goods producing services only account for 28% of GDP. From this, we see that service industry is almost 2.5 times more productive than the goods producing sector. And if we are to be competitive globally, our goods industry will have to improve in that regard and start becoming more productive. And it is for this reason, I'm encouraging individuals and businesses in the goods producing sector to make use of the Jamaica Productivity Center. They are here to serve you so that your businesses can improve productivity levels and be more efficient in delivering goods and services. Efficiency is vital in businesses, and that is why the ministry is fully on board with the JPC. Through the Jamaica Productivity Center, in collaboration with Japan International Cooperation Agency, JICA, we were able to revolutionize our work permit section. They identified our inefficiencies and was able to fix them. So now there is a higher quality service as a result of the modernization exercise currently being implemented. The ministry recently launched its labor market information systems website and mobile app. This app now allows employers to post job openings, and persons seeking employment can now upload their resumes. We have also been working to improve our national insurance scheme by digitizing the benefits record, the automation of benefit application and approval processes, the automation of the process to register with the NIS, upgrading our network and investing in new technologies. This current pandemic has been disruptive to many industries in Jamaica. The Jamaica Productivity Center is conducting a survey to record and collate the experiences and measures taken, as well as the outcome of such actions by organizations. The information from the analysis will be able to assist and guide organizations as the best approach to coming out of this pandemic that will enable all to grow and contribute positively to the economy. This survey has the added benefit of encouraging entities to record and measure their own journey through this pandemic. I urge you to participate in this electronic survey so that we chart the best way forward. Thank you all, and I hope that this forum will indeed be productive.
Thank you, Minister Mayne, for that charge and for your words and for sharing with our viewers and listeners today the improvement initiatives that have been happening within the Ministry of Labour. You spoke of innovations and digitization, which will lead to higher efficiencies within the ministry. Truly an example for everyone. And as we go along, we will hear more about some of the things that the minister just mentioned. He also mentioned the need for improvement and where our statistics lie as it relates to productivity. And what we are going to do next is to share with you, our audience, our listeners, and as well as the panel, some productivity statistics and information developed by the Productivity Center. Mr. Wendel Ivey is going to be sharing that information with us. And then what we will do is then open to the panelists to speak to some of the issues that are brought out in the presentation from their perspectives as it relates to productivity. And then as we continue in the presentation, you'll be able to interact with your questions to the audience, to the panel. Right, so at this time, I am going to ask Mr. Wendel Ivey, who is our trainee economist at the Jamaica Productivity Center with a specialization in economic development and international economics. He will be speaking to us today, giving a brief presentation to you, our listeners and our viewers, on some of the current productivity statistics. So we'll give him this is something that Wendel could speak a week on, but we'll just give him a few minutes to quickly take us through some of those stats. Over to you, Mr. Ivey.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Okay, so I'll be sharing my screen. Everybody see my screen now? No, okay. So today I'll be just looking at productivity performance because we can.
I have no audio. I cannot hear if I've been asked to speak.
Nobody can.
Not as yet, Gillian. You are fine. Wendel is presenting at the moment.
Wendel, I'm hearing you.
Okay, good.
I'm hearing you.
Great. All right, so today, I'll be just showing some productivity performance from a global perspective, a regional perspective, and also, of course, we can't leave out our dear country, Jamaica, out of it. So this is how I actually proceed with the presentation. Why productivity? What is productivity? The global productivity performance, productivity in the Caribbean, Jamaica's performance, a few factors that have been hampering productivity, and also possible solutions to that. So now, when you look at this picture, basically, we look at it. You realize that you have one person, they are doing a bit of work, basically, but there's another person suggesting something that could possibly make work a bit easier, or as we would term it, more productive. But those persons are actually saying, no thanks, we are too busy working. But if they should add this wheel to this card, then they would actually use less strength and they will reach much faster. So that is basically the underlying concept of what we would like to see with productivity. So now, why productivity? The productivity can basically benefit the government, business, and consumers. Government will benefit from higher income. The business can benefit from more output, more profits, and consumers can basically increase their quality of life by purchasing goods for lower prices, basically. And it is here, I point out a few points of profitability. business growth, customer satisfaction, competitiveness, and a boost in morale. But why productivity? But what is productivity? So basically, productivity is just simply how efficient you transform or convert inputs into output. You have different types of productivity. You have single factor productivity, which you use one factor, for example, labor to create an output, capital to create an output, or you have multi-factor productivity now, like total factor productivity, in which you use different or more than one inputs to create that output. But today we'll be focusing predominantly on labor productivity, so that is the output per worker. We want to see how that has changed over time in the world, the Caribbean, and also in Jamaica. So we now look at the global performance, productivity performance. So now, since the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009, global productivity has slowed down. And there are some underlying factors in which economists have argued that has caused this or has led to this. They cite that slower pace of technological progress, weak demand, lower capital investment, and slowdown in international trade flows. So those are some of the things that economists are arguing or researching about that has led to this global decline in productivity since the global financial crisis. So as you can see on this map, this is basically the world, and the red line that you see there is basically the average for the period from 1951 to 2019. That's the average productivity growth globally. So that line says basically on this graph is showing about 2%. In decimal, it is basically like 1.9%. Basically, it's basically the same. But if you can see this graph, you realize that there are a lot of troughs in it. So, for example, each one of these troughs, for example, 1991, 2009, 1981, for example, all those were global recessions or recessions within countries that take a larger share of the global output. So now we're at 2019, and as the economist has pointed out, that global growth in productivity has slowed down since the financial crisis, and we can see that here in 2009, that dip, and it has not recovered. It came up back by the V-shaped, but then it basically went down again. So now we're at 2019 based on this data, but we know that COVID has impacted the world severely. So I am expecting or estimating that come 2020 or the next 2 years, when this data is released again, then we would see another spike similar to that of the global financial crisis, or even more severe in this. So if you should basically take the world apart in terms of regions over the same time period, and we are interested to see Latin America and the Caribbean, we realize that we are almost, our output per worker, our labor productivity is one of the lowest in the world. We are basically our output is per worker is only higher than Africa. So that's where we are. If you look, we can see where the Middle East. So the Middle East is basically those countries, Qatar, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, that has a lot of oil and stuff. So initially in the 1950s coming up, they were using less labor to do what they were doing. But if you should check the data and look through it, you will realize that over time, they have started to use more labor, so more input to get similar resources. So therefore, similar output. So therefore, their productivity has been significantly declining. So you will see where they have been around, and this data is in US dollars, 2018 dollars. So you will see now where their productivity has come down so much because they have been adding more and more labor to their process, and they are not getting a higher level of output. So therefore, you can say basically you have a situation where you might have a firm, for example, and you have a firm, you hire someone to do a particular job, but you already add someone in that unit. But instead of that new person coming in and adding something different to the process, that person is actually sharing the existing work that was there. So therefore, now you find that you add one more person to the process. So that is like, if you had one person, you had another person to breast it, you would increase your labor force by 100%. But that person did not increase your output by 100%. They basically just shared the existing work that was there. So you will actually see a fall in output like that, in productivity. So if we should look at the numbers, let's look at it, look at look at the Latin American and Caribbean region, because we are always focused on where we are relative to the rest of the world. You realize that, hey, this is by decades, right? So if you realize in 1960, Latin American productivity was growing at like 41% for that decade. Yeah, but when you look at this decade from 2010 to 2019, productivity is merely at 3%. That's for the Latin American and Caribbean region. And when you look at this, remember I was just explaining what has been happening in the Middle East. You know? The Middle East, they are adding more labor to their thing, and they're not getting any additional output. So their productivity has been actually declining. But if you should take out the Middle East from it, those countries, then you would see that Latin America and the Caribbean, we are performing, our output per worker is actually the lowest as at 2019. So now let's look more at what has been happening in the Caribbean. So this is now, I've picked out a few countries: Barbados, Dominican Republic, Jamaica, of course, St. Lucia, Trinidad and Tobago. And yes, I put Jamaica in red for a reason, because we are not performing relative to our other neighbors. And if you look, you realize that Trinidad and Tobago is doing very well. And if you look also, Dominican Republic has a very interesting story going on right there. Because if you should look at in 1950, Denmark was basically third, basically third. You can call it third there. But look at their progress. This is the orange line going up. They are now basically at second. But if we as a country, Jamaica, if we want to basically improve our productivity, naturally we would want to look at what our neighbors are doing. So I went through it and I realized that Trinidad and Tobago isn't the best example to follow, because Trinidad and Tobago is a country where they have large resources in terms of oil. And if you examine their economy, every year the oil sector basically outperforms the rest of the economy. And in any year that the rest of the economy outperforms the oil sector, that the productivity in the country actually falls. And also, whenever there are changes in global oil prices, Trinidad and Tobago's output actually either it increases significantly or it decreases significantly. For example, in 2016, there was a reduction in oil prices, and then Trinidad's economy basically went into a recession while the rest of the world was going on quite fine. So Trinidad and Tobago wouldn't be the best example for Jamaica to follow if we want to say increase our productivity. Dominican Republic now has a more interesting story and would be, I think, more relevant to our Jamaican context. So what Dominican Republic has been doing is that they have been investing and making high value added products. For example, they sell medical equipment and stuff like that. I've always been saying that Jamaica does not lack innovation or anything like that, or imagination, but it is just the facilitation of that innovation and creativity. That is what we're actually lacking. Because if you look on the street, you might be driving on the road and you see certain guys driving some carts, music carts. That's innovation and creativity. But that is what we need to facilitate as a country, so that now we can come up with more high value added goods and possibly services. Yeah, so that is one thing where we can look to basically increase our output per person by actually doing that. So if we should split, look at the numbers behind those graphs, let's look at the Caribbean productivity levels over here on the left. Look at where Jamaica was in 1960, the value. This is in US dollars, by the way, 2018 US dollars. You realize that we were at basically, if you should round this up, it would be 20,000. And if you should look at 2019, it is basically 20,000. So we basically haven't moved. And if you look at Trinidad and Tobago, they were at 27,000 and now they're at 69. Everybody has basically progressed, but we are still at the same level. And so on the right now, I basically decompose it into a 20-year period to see the average growth for the entire period. And if you look for between 2000 and 2019, Jamaica's output per worker, our labor productivity has decreased by 15%, while the rest of the world has basically, the rest of the region, the rest of the countries in the Caribbean region that we have data for, has basically made some amount of progress, even if it is at least 1%. So now we are going to zoom in more into Jamaica now. So basically, the Jamaican economy is divided into two sectors. We have the goods producing sector and we have the service producing sector. So the goods producing sector is all those industries that actually produce a tangible commodity. For example, you have agriculture, you have construction, you have manufacturing and mining and quarrying. While on the other hand, we have the services now that the service producing sector are just those industries that actually provide a service. So if you should look at the contribution from these two sectors from 2000 to 2018, because why we have 2018 is because that is the latest annual data that the Statistical Institute has up to date. So we are actually in that period now. So if you look at this, you realize that from 2000 till to 2018, it basically sees that this basically shows that the service producing sector has been contributing more to our productivity levels than the goods producing sector. Now this begs the question. So if we should improve productivity in the country, which one of these should we target? Should we target the goods producing sector? Should we target the service producing sector? We already know that the service sector contributes about 70%. So should we try to go for that? Or should we try to produce some high value added goods? This is a question that I've been asking myself. But now I realize that we can basically target both. For example, we have agriculture. Agriculture could be transformed to an high-level agricultural sector that is basically improving the goods producing sector. You have global services. You could basically upskill what is in that sector same way, and then we still get a higher level of productivity. So we have options, basically. So this is how the goods producing sector has been performing over the period 2000 to 2018, and we realize that agriculture has been flat, construction, manufacturing, it is only mining that has been seen significant change, which is basically higher than everything else. And the reason for that is because mining is a high value added type of skill thing. And when you mine and think the goods that you're producing or the output is of a very high value. So you can actually see it here. It's actually playing out. When you look at the service producing sector, you realize that, okay, then you have electricity, gas, and electricity and water supply, and you have financial and insurance services. So because everything, electricity and water supply, those are essential services. And if you have an economy where essential services are not productive, then we're in problem. So the main fact that electricity and water supply is basically productive because most of everything involves these. So this will be actually adding a lot of high value to other sectors. And then you have the finance and insurance up there with it, saying that because these banks and insurance services, they are more likely to basically use technology or try to get the latest technology so that they can actually be more efficient. So that is understandable why they're actually up there. But for the rest of the economy, the services they're not adding much to the productivity levels, or the productive levels has been very low. So this is the rank of the sectors as of 2018 based on statistics. So this is the latest ranking. And you can see agriculture, forestry, and fishing is way down there in terms of productivity. The reason for this is that agriculture takes a lot of labor. So if we can actually improve by having that level of labor in there, actually adding some higher value than what it is doing today, then we can see a great impact coming from the agricultural sector. So now I put this here to show a very interesting story. So I plotted it from 1950, and this is by decade, right? So if we should look at the 1950s, 60s coming up, we would realize that our GDP was growing at a very high level by decade, right? Our labor productivity was also high, and our per capita income was also high. But our employment growth was very low. If we should transition now into this 2010 to 2019 period, look what has happened. You have employment growing faster than everything else, and once you have employment growing faster than your output, then we will be in problems, and that is one of the reasons why we have low productivity in Jamaica. It is there. So remember, productivity, as I said, is how efficient you transform your input into output. In this case, the labor or the employed persons are the input. So if the input is going at a faster rate than the output is the GDP growth here, which is in the blue, or yeah, I'll call it blue. It's in the blue. You realize why we have the red line being down here. Productivity will actually be low. So that is what has been happening. A lot of labor has been going in, but the output from this labor is either staying the same or is increasing, but at a slower rate than the employment. And this is total factor productivity. Remember I said that you have single factor productivity and you have total factor productivity. So total factor productivity is simply all the other factors that affects output other than capital and labor. And this is also has been low, as you can see for the period. It has been barely, well, it is actually in a negative now. So this also explains why we have very low productivity growth, because labor is inefficient, but also all the other factors that actually goes into that production process is also inefficient. So that is why we are having low productivity growth. And a few factors, I've just listed a few factors. So as one of the services that the JPC offers is that they do productivity audit. So they basically go into firms and try to see if there are anything that is actually hampering the process. So now, when they actually go in, they find that some of the processes are very inefficient. Yeah. And a lot of firms, they don't measure. So if they don't measure, they can't know where they were last year versus this year. They are just performing and doing what they're doing. So they don't know. If they are being efficient, they don't know. And if they are being unproductive, they still don't know. So some of the things that came out, you have, like, for example, bureaucracy, you have predominantly low productivity, low value-added products, crime, traffic congestion, and lack of suitable technology integration, as well as you have the job and skill mismatch. So these are some of the factors that are actually hampering productivity growth in Jamaica. Possible solutions that we could look to, we need to invest higher in research and development, because as a region, we spend like less than 1% of our GDP annually on research and development, while at the global level, countries are actually spending 2.5%. So that is something that we actually need to work on. I mentioned people having the skills I mentioned people having the skills, or they have that creative mind, but there's no facilitation for that. So one of the things that I was thinking is that if we could have competitions that allows people to come up with ingenious ways of making certain products or stuff like that, then those products now, we could actually try to see, market. Not all the products will actually make it, but there might be products that could be marketed properly, and then we could have at least a lower probability of we getting some products coming up. But that is the thing behind it. We need higher education and more focused training programs. And as I had mentioned before, upskilling the global services industry. So that's basically like the BPO. And I'm thinking also with that, there can also be greater linkages between the goods producing and service producing sector. And that basically concludes the productivity performance from a global level, regional level, and also what has been happening to Jamaica.
Thank you, Wendell, for that rousing presentation.
You're welcome.
You gave us a mouthful just now in terms of our performance coming from way back in the 60s to till now. And you spoke of a number of things. You gave us a definition for productivity, the need for productivity to have wheels and to be mobilized. For, you know, I want to, at this point, before I go any further, to welcome all the persons that have joined the forum this morning. You are listening to the discussion around World Productivity Day, Jamaica's productivity performance, working smarter and not harder. And you are now in the discussion segment. So Wendell, Ivey, our research analyst, just gave us an overview of how we're performing, a lot of food for thought. Some of the things you may be hearing for the first time, like total factor productivity and, you know, labor productivity, capital productivity. And at this point, we're now going to turn over to our panel who will, based on some of the things that Wendell just spoke of and also their experiences, and they will speak to some of the issues that are here. And the first question we're gonna ask our panelists is that, you know, Wendell just shared some perspectives and experiences. Now, you know, how can we reverse those trends? And I think Wendell spoke to some of those things. But we have to look at going forward, especially now in light of the pandemic. We know where we are coming from and what we did didn't work. So how can we do things differently going forward to improve our standing as a country? And I will go to our first panelist, who is Mr. Douglas Orane, who is a Woolmerian, Age Quadagis, and an industrial engineer, as myself. So he's very dear to my heart. Also the retired chairman of this and CEO of the GraceKennedy Limited. He has a lifelong passion about increasing productivity of Jamaicans. And you would have seen his 5-part series in the Jamaica Gleaner on solutions to improve productivity across the society. And it's entitled Baking a Bigger Pie Rather Than Fighting Over a Slice of It. So I'm going to first open up the floor to Mr. Orane. Over to you to share with the audience your thoughts.
Thank you, Tamar, and congratulations to the Productivity Center in making this happen. And most importantly, congratulations to you starting more or less on time. Because one of the things I keep repeating to people is not original. There's an entrepreneur who does business globally named Michael Fairbanks. And he made a statement, I heard it on Jamaican radio 15 years ago. He said, people who go late to meetings live in poor countries. So the journalist who was interviewing him said, well, so if I start going early to meetings, I'll become wealthy. He says, no, absolutely not. But punctuality is a precondition for wealth creation. Now you look around our society in Jamaica and ask yourself, yesterday, how much time did you lose of your 24 hours because other people were late or they promised to do something and didn't do it? And it's something I do almost as a hobby. I would say about 30% of my time is chewed up by people being late or not delivering on time what they said they were going to do. So if you factor that into what Wendell was saying, I believe it starts to answer some of the paradox, Wendell, about how is it we're such creative people and yet our productivity is so low and over 40 years. So there are things we can do immediately. Now, we only have an hour and a half left. So I want to look to the future about what do we do to make a difference. The number one issue is leadership. leadership in every sector, the private sector, the public sector, the political directorate, the professions, academia, because I have a confession to make. I, as a retired business person, have failed my country by finding ways to increase productivity in the areas over which I had significant control, which was GraceKennedy. But I was not able to transmit that out into the wider society for others to learn from that effectively and for them to do it themselves. And there are lots of examples of dramatic increases in productivity in our country. It's just that we have not, as leaders, shown others how to do it. I'm going to give you another example. So GraceKennedy is one where we doubled productivity between 1995 and 2000 because of the financial crisis that was taking place in the early 90s. But it's doable in the public sector. So Hart NTA doubled their productivity between 2016-17 and 2019-20. 2016-17, they trained 74,000 people. In 2019-2020, they trained 152,000 people. So people who say it's not possible or feasible for people in the public sector to increase their productivity, I said that's absolute nonsense. The reason for it is effective leadership of the organization. How did they do it? Well, you can phone the CEO of Hart Trust NTA and ask her. But it was basically what they did. They had a merger of 4 entities and they used the synergies, but they also use a lot of the activities of each to complement each other and double the training of us Jamaicans in that period. So I wanted to go back to what Wendel had. You had some recommendations there. And I think there are 5 of them. And that's a great place to start. What I realize is that labor productivity and what is called capital intensity, which is basically what employers have control over, investing in machinery and equipment and so on, are very important. But the other one, total factor productivity, is absolutely shocking in the developing world. Total factor productivity, which is things like infrastructure, like public transportation, like innovation, like the educational systems, accounts for 40% of productivity increases. In Jamaica, that figure is negative. So what it means is even if we are doing our best to increase labor productivity, which is what we tend to focus on, and I have to put in a word for my colleague workers across Jamaica. People look to labor and say, well, you need to increase productivity. And there are many cases of them doing it, but it's only one of 3 factors. There's a capital intensity and total factor productivity. So I'll give you a simple example. If it takes you 2 hours to come to work and 2 hours to go back in the evening, that's 4 hours. What effect do you think it has on productivity? A massive effect, because it reduces the ability to not only the time at work, but it also means that your ability to concentrate because you're tired by the time you get to work is causing your productivity to decline at work. We need to address all of those issues. So what I say for the future, and perhaps that's where we need to concentrate, how do we solve those issues? Instead of, we're very good at analysis of the past. So here's one. This COVID crisis gives us the opportunity to change gears literally within weeks. For years, we've been talking about digitizing, working from home. You realize what that does? That's going to cut down the commuting time of 4 hours to 0. What effect will that have on productivity? A huge one. How do we embrace that? The next one is we realize that a lot of what we eat, well, let me put it a different way. I personally have made a decision to eat more yam, green bananas, and sweet potatoes rather than imported rice. Why is that? It's not only because it will make me healthier, but also because it will contribute to the GDP growth of Jamaica and our own productivity. So we need to replicate that over and over, right through to the macro level. But again, personal decisions make a huge difference. And so, Wendel, I think you're on spot with your 5th recommendation, and that is integrating our goods producing sector, the services sector. So how do we pivot agriculture now for local consumption as well as for the tourist industry? And then the final one I'd make, I speak to a lot of young people. It's one of my hobbies to encourage them to be entrepreneurial. I said, how many of you listen or watch podcasts? 1 out of maybe every 50. I said, do you realize what your competitors in Asia and Europe, North America and Africa are doing when you see them on their cell phones? They're not watching last night's dancehall or pictures, photographs of car accidents. They're learning using free education online to learn to be better mathematicians, better scientists, learn foreign languages. And so we're one of the most advanced countries in terms of cellular integration in our society and our lives, but we're not using it for increasing productivity. And I throw out therefore a challenge to the younger generation to go and start watching podcasts to improve yourself as of today. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Orane. Wow, that was jam-packed with nuggets, for us. You mentioned a number of things in terms of going forward. So we have to think in the future, thinking forward. You mentioned punctuality, leadership, and not only leadership, but effective leadership, and us changing gears, as it were, and having to do so quickly. And, listening to you, I remember one quote in terms of, as it relates to Jamaica, and I don't remember who said it, but as a nation, our difficulty lies not in developing new ideas, but rather escaping the old ones, right? And I think we we tend to hold on to things. And you mentioned us catapulting into another sphere and time because of this pandemic, which is a good thing. And the thing that we don't want to do is to go back to where we're coming from and not make use of this opportunity that this wave that we are on. And you mentioned a number of things, podcasts, and the young people making use of that. And that's something that is growing in the tech space. Different platforms are being created to accommodate that. And we do have a young lady here with us that is experienced in that field, Ms. Denique Ferguson, who is studied electronics and social marketing at the University of the West Indies. Also works as a business analyst and did her MSc in human computer interaction design at Indiana University, Bloomington. Ms. Denique is also what you call a SlashRoots. She is at SlashRoots and she's their chief prober, right? Denique also was a member of our 4th Industrial Revolution Forum that we had with the youths last year in November, and we welcome Denique this morning to share her perspectives on what was just said in terms of where we are now, how we can move forward, but more so how we can move forward and what are the opportunities that have come up as a result of that. Denique, over to you.
Thank you, Tamar. So in looking at, how it is that we can move forward, and I was thinking about some of the things that Mr. Orane said, that of course, you have to think about all the different inputs that you're putting in, all the different inputs that you have. And so even if you have gains, on the labor side, if if you don't have that supported by the capital and the infrastructure, then you would still have problems, making that kind of growth in productivity that you really want. But that being said, I think it's important to, as individuals who might not necessarily be in maybe the big decision-making roles, or maybe you feel that you're not, because sometimes that's really just, a perception too, that don't think, well, that's it. If I can't keep, trying to carry, carry water with this basket. And so some of the things that he had mentioned about even how we use technology, right? Because we have at least a couple generations by now who maybe are considered very familiar with technology, right? It seems as if they know their way around a phone from they're born and these things, but that doesn't necessarily correlate to, I know how to use this for a productive purpose, right? Or what we might call digital literacy. So people might be able to use these as consumption devices. They know if I click this, I will get to see this video, and that's basically it. But they haven't really thought about, well, what are the things that this allows me to do? And so I just wanted to build on, what he was saying about and from an individual perspective, just looking at how you can improve your own digital literacy, right? And your own education and development. Like you said, some of it is what you consume. So maybe you don't have to go very far out of what it is that you normally do, right? Just maybe look at a few different YouTube videos where you're now talking about how it is you can use the technology in front of you to achieve things differently. So that's definitely one, right? You don't necessarily have to go now for formal education, things that you have to spend money on in the same way anymore. You have these resources that are open to you. It's just for you to go and to use that. So that's part of it. Another thing too that I would look at is that even if you're looking at building things from the infrastructure side, sometimes we think of it just in terms of the product, right? We need to have these computers, or we need to have this kind of thing, physical thing, in order to help us do our work. But there are a lot of kind of complementary services that attend that, right? Just as how you don't say, okay, I want to know about something, I am going to, get this book, and you get the book and it just sits on the table, right? So sometimes if you're thinking about, all right, I'm just improving my infrastructure, or I'm getting these fancy tools, if you're not now actively engaging with those tools, examining them and really looking at what the possibilities are, and keeping in mind that this is not a set it and forget it kind of thing, right? Where I've now got this computer, I've got this thing, and it's supposed to automatically make me more productive. Right. You have to put in that effort and that work to be able to understand the functions of that tool itself and the possibilities, and be able to apply it. And when you're talking about applying it, that can be a scary thing, right? Because you're talking about doing something in a different way from maybe you were doing before. And especially if, say, you feel that, you're not a key decision maker in your organization, you've been trying to suggest, much like Mr. Ivey had in his cartoon, with the fellows who are hauling rocks, and somebody's trying to say, hey, I have an idea for how to make that hauling process more efficient. And they said, no, we're busy, don't worry about it. You can feel powerless that, okay, well, I can't make a decision, that's it. But you can do these little improvements sometimes in the course of your own work. Sometimes what's easier is to show people rather than tell people. Right? And so if you're able to make some small improvement in the way that you do your own bit of work, then that is something that can help to, I guess, make that bigger argument for how we can do things differently. And keep in mind too, that part of learning how to do things differently, part of that research and development process, right, also means that along the way, you're going to find several ways that that don't actually work, right? You might have an idea in mind that, hey, I could put these things together, do it in this way, and then it doesn't actually materialize. And sometimes people say that, okay, that's it, we're not trying anything again. But you don't want that. That's a failure mindset. What you really want is something now where you're talking about learning, right? And that everything you do now gives you an opportunity to say, this maybe didn't work out. What can we change? What can we take? The parts that worked, because usually it's not a complete failure. Something went well, something didn't. Tweak it and see how you can do that again. So those would be a couple of things that I would say. Is one is like working on your own individual digital literacy, being familiar with the tools that are out there, not just for consumption, but what the possibilities are. And there's so many resources online that you can find to do that. And then of course, that whole mindset about what does it take now to try and do things differently, right? And not being afraid or not thinking of it as a failure, but rather looking at how can we use these learning opportunities to build on what we're doing over time, even if we can't make one big wholesale change all at once.
Thank you, Denique. Those were excellent points that you just mentioned. You know, and I think I've had this conversation with other panelists that, you know, for many years or months, we may have had books by our side table, but this COVID situation have allowed us to get some of those reading done. And I see some smiles on my panelists. There are a lot of things that were shelved, right? So we were able to clear some of that during this time. But you also mentioned owning, you know, our own progress. And a little later, Denique, I'll come back to you and ask you to share with our listeners some of those resources that are available, because there are many free digital resources that are available that persons can utilize to improve their own digital literacy. So, you know, having a phone doesn't mean you're digitally literate, basically, that's what she's saying, or making you productive. And I think Douglas already spoke to some things that persons may be doing that are not necessarily adding value to you or to the country. And both persons so far mentioned that there is a personal responsibility that each person has in terms of improving our national productivity. And even though it may be scary, small improvements can get us a far way, right? So moving on in our panel, we heard a little bit about total factor productivity from Wendel. Mr. Orane touched on it, and then he spoke to some of those key drivers. Now, this matter of total factor productivity is so critical, and we heard the numbers there that 40% contribution, right? So it's something that we really need to understand and pay attention to. And the Jamaica Productivity Center is a part of a subcommittee of the National Competitiveness Council, right? That is looking at the whole matter of TFP and decomposing it to see how can we drive that factor as a country, right? To really break it down. And this committee, you'll hear more from us. We are in collaboration with the Jamaica Promotions Organization in this subcommittee. And, you know, we will be calling on all the partners to play a part in it. And I know you don't see our labor unions represented here, but we have subsequent fora that we will be having where we will engage in and deep diving more into some of these issues that are affecting productivity, because I mean, this is a topic we can speak to for days and days and we'll not finish, because everything affects productivity and productivity affects everything, right? And so in terms of the whole matter of TFPs, just to let the audience know, some of the key drivers or critical success factors were mentioned. So we're talking about things like education and training, certification, capacity utilization. We spoke to that, so not just having the tool, but using it to full capacity, technology, innovation and automation, management and the quality of management and leadership, traffic congestion, crime and security, infrastructure, so your water, housing and energy plays a big part, access to finance, transparency and corruption, rewards and incentives, health, and how we do things, our methods and our processes. So we're seeing a huge gamut of things here to decompose as it relates to how to improve. And at this time, I'm going to introduce none other than my travel partner, Mr. Chen, who is, you know, he has so many things listed here, I don't know where to start, honestly.
Please don't start, Tamar.
Do you need an introduction, Mr. Chen?
No.
Mr. Chen.
I know what I'm saying makes sense or not. It's not based on the fact that we might have our name scratched on a wall in a restaurant in Haiti.
I will leave that right there. So Mr. Chen, welcome to the panel.
Well, thanks for having me.
And you know, from the employer side of things, how can we look to the future? What can we do? You know, actively do as individuals, as businesses, as you know, as a country in terms of
there are so many things we can do. I'll start by making a nod to the two earlier, the three earlier, if we include our dear economists. But Doug may not know it, but I quote him all the time. And I quote him on one particular thing, and there's a particular practice, because he spoke to leadership at all levels. Many, many, many years ago, when GraceKennedy was going through its own transformation, and this is back in the 1990s, and we sound like ancient history now, Doug. One of his key executives had mentioned to me in passing that Mr. Orane starts his meetings on time, regardless of who is there. And it was a practice I adopted many years ago also, whether in the private sector or in the many government and state agencies that I've chaired. And it's an important one, because the management of time and the respect for other people's time is one of the critical components of productivity. And the best way to start is by leading from the front and leading by example. I'll share one slightly amusing story with you. Several years ago, I was on the way to a meeting in downtown Kingston, and I had underestimated the amount of traffic and the amount of time. And I remember I'd reached the traffic light at just above the GraceKennedy office down, at the corner of East Street, and right by the Miles Lecture and Garden building. It was about 5 minutes to 10, and I got a call. And it was the corporate secretary frantically saying asking if I was all right. I said, I might be a little bit late. And she said, you have never been here less than 10 minutes before the meeting was about to start. And we got worried because it's not like you at all. And I'm saying, it sounds a little AR, retentive for those of you who don't know what AR means, or OCD, I think is a more modern parlance. But let us start. We can start somewhere, and we start by respecting time and understanding time. Coming to thinking about productivity and seeing, rather than talking around the subject, because Jamaica, you can plot Jamaica's development, certainly for the last 60 years, or lack thereof, by the slow or negative growth in productivity in Jamaica. It is heartrending, Mr. Ivey, to see where Jamaica was in 1960 and where we are 60 years later. When we look at where our peers are coming from, Jamaica was just slightly behind Barbados in 1960, and it's a point we have made several times over the years. But when we look at where Barbados is today, Trinidad is an outlier, of course, because of huge capital investments in the oil and gas sector. The oil reserves are down now, but the natural gas has really taken up. The natural gas has taken up where oil has fallen off. But when we look at the Dominican Republic, which is more like us, and seeing that the Dominican Republic was 40% behind Jamaica in 1960 and is now at 50% ahead. We watched it, those of us who have been following these numbers watched it happen right before our very eyes and did very little in terms of fixing the issue. But coming to Denique, this is before you were born, but those of us who were around then, we would have remembered NASA putting men on the moon in 1969, 50 years ago. But the thing that always comes up is that in the palms of our hands, those of us who have a smartphone, we have more computing power in the palm of our hands than NASA had at its disposal, putting men on the moon in 1969. So we have powerful tools. In many organizations, I say everybody in the organization has a smartphone. Most offices now have Wi-Fi. Most organizations have a closed user group, so it's not a personal cost to individuals to use their smartphones. But I ask the question, how have you integrated the smartphones into the day-to-day activities of your organization? One of the more poignant stories I've heard in the last few days, and it comes in the post-COVID experience. I got a call, and I get a lot of calls from workers in Jamaica because I've given many presentations. So there's a certain amount of trust where workers will call me, even though ostensibly I'm an employer's rep or the face of the opposition. And their concern was that when the government gave its back to work recommendation, and I wouldn't even put order, recommendation, 40 persons ended up in what was a congested office again. So social distancing became impossible. And people who had been working quite productively, they thought, from home up to the back to work, were suddenly back there. Now, when the instruction had come to work from home, practice social distancing, practice healthful activities, the workers were grateful. Many of them were women who had children at home because school is closed, so they were able to multitask at home, supervise the tutoring and so on and so forth, and carry out their tasks pretty efficiently where they were. Shifts were staggered and so on and so forth. So a lot of innovation went in at the beginning of the middle of March. But by 2 weeks ago, they were just evaporated like nothing had happened. So of course I got concerned and I called the CEO of the entity and said, what in heaven is going on? And the CEO kind of chuckled a little, embarrassedly and said, well, to tell the truth, the supervisor wasn't confident that people were really doing the amount of work at home. So I said, so in 3 months that you had folks at home working, management could not have put in place methods to measure the output while people were at home. Again, I chuckled and they did nothing. And it drove home to me again that we can talk around the issue, we can make nice speeches and so on. But what we really need in Jamaica, and I'm telling you, we have generations of young people who are willing for it, are waiting for it. But some of us old guys, we are really holding up progress in this country because we are not willing to innovate or allow innovation to take place. The biggest innovation that Jamaica needs is not in science, it is in management and leadership. We have to learn how to accept or create structures that allow innovation, allow change, to build a culture of continuous learning and improvement. But it starts with putting in place structures that can actually measure output. And in many, many instances, it's just that we have not put enough brain power behind it. We have been complacent. We just have to be better than the neighbor, better than the competitor, typically local, than saying, how do we become world-class? How do we make sure that the people within our organization become world-class? It starts in the classroom. How many teachers are willing to say, I'm not going to come and have you just copy notes off of that board. Everybody must have their smartphone. The kids have smartphones. Now we can have another big discussion about access to broadband in Jamaica. I will only say this, that in 2013, the government of Mexico made it a constitutional right to have broadband. I don't know if we have to have a constitutional change in Jamaica to make broadband access for everyone, but I can tell you, I would be a supporter of it because I can see where we are really going to create the digital haves and the digital have-nots in Jamaica and create a further cleavage in the society if we are not careful. But let us start with access to broadband. Can you imagine if every child in Jamaica had access to broadband and we had teachers who were willing to say, look, I'm going to put all the material online. You can go and look at the material anytime you want, but the classroom is only going to be about discussion. Everything is going to be a class discussion. The sorting and regurgitation of learned school challenge quiz style stuff is not where the world is going to be taking us. Innovation is going to take place when you guys learn how to think, and when you guys are going to learn the love of learning that you never stop learning. And learning, my parents are 90 and 87 years old, respectively. I remember a few years ago, they were gifted iPads, and some of my siblings were a little skeptical as to whether they would adapt iPads. But my mom quickly learned how to use her email. My dad learned how to play dominoes online, and many, many innovations took place. And I can tell you, if 80-somethings can learn how to use an iPad and navigate the internet, none of us are restricted in that. But my parents were devotees of continuous learning. They never had a lot of formal education because the doors were closed back in the 30s and 40s for them to go further.
So
Certainly,
Mr.
university was an option then.
Yeah, so you're
But
saying that
if they can do it, we have generations and generations younger who can do it. Tamar, you touched on a very important term that has really fallen into my mind in the bigger context of digital transformation. I mean, I don't know if Therese is listening, but Therese Turner-Jones at the IDB is a great proponent of digital transformation for Jamaica to make a quantum leap forward. Digital transformation is not a big hairy concept out there, you know. It is, how do I, a couple of weeks ago, I had to get one of my motor vehicles license registration updated. I really couldn't spend a half day at the tax office, so I asked my driver to go down to the tax office. He went there at 1 o'clock in the Monday afternoon. I believe, let me see. The license expired at the end of May, so June 1st would have been the drop-down day now to go and get it done. So I said, let me go on June 1st to get the license done. At Minister 4, they told him they couldn't manage anybody else in the collectorate. So he went back at 7 on the Tuesday morning and eventually got through at 9. So here you have 3 hours wasted on Monday and another 2 hours wasted on Tuesday to do an online, to update your vehicle registration, which is necessary to make sure that you are complying with the law, which is necessary to make sure that the government gets its revenues and so on and so forth. But when I multiply that number, and I'm not going to knock the staff at the Mandible Collectorate because they are some of the most wonderful people. They work fast, they don't complain. I'm not going to knock the people waiting in line because there's always a crowd there and people are very patient. But when you think of the number of man/woman hours, I have to be politically correct, lost just by people standing in line at the collectorate every day, I have to wonder if we haven't learned anything. I don't know how many of you would have been familiar, and jump back 10 years now, with a time before when you had to make different payments for the payroll deductions. And as an employee, that was a big bureaucratic headache every month. The government did a simple thing to join the monthly payments in one. And government in the first quarter overshot revenues by over $300 million. So you don't even have an argument against making the processes more efficient and adding to the overall productivity. But somehow we just don't get it done. Just yesterday, I was in a meeting, and this is wearing another hat now in public sector healthcare. Somebody called me in the morning, concerned citizen, saying, why aren't we using more telemedicine in the health centers? And it's pretty straightforward. If you have limited resources in terms of specialized expertise, why don't we use whether tablets, smartphones in the 300 plus health centers in Jamaica to ensure that even if you don't have a specialist on hand, you have access to a specialist where the public health nurse or the general practitioner or the community health aide might have a question. It would seem to be a no-brainer, wouldn't it? And yes, we do have Project Echo funded by the IDB that will eventually make it happen. But I know we're going to hit a wall somewhere out there when you realize that broadband access in public health centers is the next challenge. But I say, why aren't we stepping back from the issue coming back to the Mexican situation, which they recognized 7 years ago, and say broadband can give us that quantum leap forward in Jamaica, tied with a digital literacy program for people of all ages, tied with schools that focus on continuous learning and continuous improvement rather than the regurgitation of facts that people can access right from the smartphone with Dr. Google at any minute of the day. I say all of this to say, while there is no panacea, I believe that there are simple drivers in our personal capacities and in the policymaking capacity that can give us a quantum leap, because it is clear that incrementalism is not going to be enough for Jamaica, given where we are now vis-a-vis to the rest of the world. I'll leave it at that for now. My soapbox is over, Tamar.
Thank you, Mr. Chen. Wow, and you ended on a very profound note right there. That that there are simple drivers that can really make an impact that we need to do. And you mentioned process efficiencies, and as an industrial engineer and going out working with these organizations, we are seeing there's so much room for improvement. And I think most of the panelists here also mentioned the whole matter of measurement. And that's something that we tend to shy away from here in the local sphere. We are afraid of measuring and sharing those metrics with persons. But that is you cannot improve if you're not measuring. You won't know what to do, and we'll just be all based on a gut feeling. And so that's one of the things we want to encourage us, even as individuals, organizations, to have that culture or habit of measuring and measuring what matters, right? And not just measuring everything, but measuring what matters and working to improve on those gaps that exist. And at this time, we are going to move on in our panel, right? Because a big part of what we have been seeing with this global shift is changing in the way how we work. And I have with us, and I have saved the best for last. And she smiles. Miss Gillian Corrodus, right? And she brings to us over 20 years of experience in the field of industrial relations. Now, at this time, there are many disruptions in the workforce from the labor side, and Gillian is going to speak to some of what is happening right now and how, as individuals and organizations, we can navigate and still thrive at this time, right? So she's, I'll open the floor to her, and please sit and pay rapt attention to what Gillian has to say. Gillian, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tamar, and good morning to my fellow panelists. And Tamar has been very kind to me, because what she has not said is that I missed some of the presentation because of poor bandwidth. But I see, Wayne, that you recognize, and I think Dougie, Orane also mentioned it, and certainly Denique, that the smartphones are very, very powerful instruments, because I'm now powered up from my smartphone. And actually, since COVID, I've been doing so much more work using my smartphone than the actual physical desktop computer. And I want to encourage all the listeners to take heart that the technology is there and we need to use it. I'm not going to go too much in there, but just to say, it is quite commendable that the JPC has created this platform for exchanging ideas and strategies that will be useful to enterprises of varying sizes as we enter this period of what we're calling post-COVID. I don't know if COVID is going anywhere. So it is described by some persons as a new normal. So whatever we call it, this global pandemic will always be remembered in our economic history. 2020 will never be forgotten in economic history. As I think I can safely say, no organization or any country globally was adequately prepared or premeditated the drastic changes that has happened in the world of work particularly. And as we move forward quickly, we have to ensure that the growth is sustainable. So micro, small, medium-sized enterprises, the multilateral organizations as well, will need to conduct a thorough assessment of the economic challenges. We need to look at what are the opportunities, because it's good to look at the challenges, but I like to focus a lot on the opportunities. Yes, we have to address the challenges, but let us look at the opportunities. We're not out in this post-pandemic era. And enterprises will have to face their realities. As we celebrate World Productivity Day 2020, we have to focus on, as the theme says, productivity performance, working smarter, not harder. And quite frankly, it makes good business sense. What it really means is that for us to remain competitive as enterprises, will have to be competitive as the country remains competitive. We will have to recognize that the changing world of work means we're going to be using less sweat and more brain power. So we're moving from enterprises that are more labor intensive to greater use of artificial intelligence. I think Wendel may have talked about some of this, but I missed because I didn't have audio at the time. It is therefore important that enterprises are able to strike the right balance between human effort and technology as the means of optimizing productivity. So several enterprises will contemplate questions like, how do we optimize resource performance without compromising quality? How do we get more human capital without burdening the workers? Meaning, how do we get more from human capital without burdening the workers? How do we constantly increase the returns on investment for every investment dollar? Now, these are natural questions that any entrepreneur would ask, and certainly it affects the human capital, the workers that have to produce. And as a Ministry of Labor, we are very, very interested in this. Our research unit, as well as the Jamaica Productivity Center, has been doing a lot of research in this area. And some of the popular prescriptive solutions include overcoming the human capital constraints. How do we get more out of workers? How do we get workers working in a way that they feel comfortable, they feel that work is rewarding, mutually rewarding, that is. Another area would be innovation, then digitization, and as I mentioned, the overall objective of enterprise is to increase the returns on investment. And I just want to touch a little bit, and Tamar, please allow me to, I call it dabble, because I just want to talk a little bit about return on investment and digitization. Then I'll go back to my core area, which is human capital. So in terms of increasing return on investment, I believe that a lot of organizations need to look at rescoping even their physical plant. Does it make sense to have this big building? Is it working for us? Is that working smart? We have to ask those questions. As we try to reduce overheads, they may have to look at the physical space. Is there wasted square footage? We have a lot of organizations which, in my opinion, has a lot of wasted square footage. Has the organization outgrown the physical space? Some spaces are just literally too small, because even as we look at the physical distancing, there are some organizations that their workspaces have persons in less than the required distance at the moment. And if those workers get sick, the entire organization is sick. So we have to look at some of these things. We also have to look at cost savings through strategic partnerships and alliances. And I recognize that in Jamaica, we have a large informal sector. And because there's this large informal sector, they're not able to work together in a way that they can share costs, because they are working together and splitting the cost of certain key things that they use, services, marketing services, distribution services. We have to get to a place that people recognize that working together will help us move in a sustainable manner. And I segue into the fact that we have to gain greater momentum in transitioning to formality. Too many companies are under the radar because they don't understand how to register, they find it onerous to register. And simply put, the micro and small enterprises need to recognize that in order to work smart and not harder, they need to optimize productivity by sharing information, research information, and being formal will give them this kind of platform to do it. So the second area I dabbled, as I said, was innovation and digitization. And Denique, if I say anything wrong, please correct me. But innovation and digitization, we have to look at research and development. Every single organization, even if you're a small cook shop, you have to research what is happening in your industry. You have to know what is going on. You have to make constant changes. So whether you're a micro, whether you're a multilateral, it's the same suggestion that's been applied. And on the point of digitization, customer service platforms need to be established. A lot of companies, large companies even in Jamaica, have very good customer service platforms, but we have very large companies that have platforms that are really not as responsive as they should be. And payment gateways should also be very responsive if we're going to work smart, because it is completely frustrating to a client who wants to sign up to make an online payment, but you have to jump so many hoops to get there. Let us make it user-friendly. It's not just to say that you have a platform and you're working smart, but is it actually really, is it working? And we have to get back to ensuring that the user, the clients are our focus. The workers are the persons on the ground. They can give advice in terms of how to improve this kind of efficiency using technology. So going back to my area of specialization, which is human capital, the whole crisis has showed us that we have to re-examine many things in terms of how human capital functions, how work happens, how workers work, how employers function. And we have to re-examine first and foremost the talent requirements. The talent requirements prior to COVID is not the same talent requirements currently, and we have to get used to that idea. We have to look at right size in the company, and certainly I didn't say that we're going to go into a wide-scale redundancy exercise, because we're the Ministry of Labor, so I should not be saying that and will not be saying that. But when I say right sizing, it's placing the talent where they can be best suited in the organization so that the organization grows. We need to recalibrate, look at what skill sets are needed, and the organization needs to pursue sustainable solutions in terms of talent engagements. We have to look at which workers need upskilling. And yes, workers are to take responsibility for their own destiny, but employers are going to be having to look at what is required, because sometimes the worker is willing, but does not know what they require in order to right fit themselves for your own organization. We need to modify our talent engagement, and we have to have the right mix or the right ratio of permanent and temporary workers. And I'm not promoting short-term contracts, please don't get me wrong. But what I'm saying is that there is a need to look at what skill sets I need, when I need them, for how long I need them, and ensure that you carefully clarify what it is that you're outsourcing. And we recognize as a ministry that a lot of employers have seen this outsourcing as a means of transferring their liability for employees, and that is certainly not what I'm speaking about. But outsourcing those services that are not mission critical services, so that your staff can focus on that which will carry your organization forward faster. So establishing what I call smart business processes is very important right now. Every organization has to look at what is this smart business process. And it doesn't matter if you're a private sector, public sector, everybody needs to look at a smart business process. And when I say smart, I'm gonna just use the acronym to explain what I mean. SMART, specific tasks for each worker. Every worker needs to know exactly what is required of them. Then it will make my work easier because we will not have so many industrial disputes. Because workers will know what is expected of them, and certainly we will expect that the workers will deliver according to the expectation. We need to ensure that the business processes are measurable, that the worker and the supervisor use verifiable, established targets, and the ministry recognizes that many of the disputes are because there were never targets properly established, and then workers are appraised, they find that the performance is below the expected company standard, then here lies the problem. And time matters, as Orane and Chen said. If you're wasting a lot of time in non-productive areas, then it is not the best solution. And certainly, we would, as a Ministry of Labor, hope that we would see a reduction in time spent trying to sort out industrial disputes, because the organizations will now have a strengthened process of interrelations between employers and workers. And in the smart business process, the businesses need to ensure that attainable targets are set. Each worker knows exactly how their talent contributes to the overall objective of the organization. If people know how their talent directly affects in a positive way the organization, I believe you get greater motivation because they believe that they are valued, they're a valid member. I saw a video just recently looking at the household workers, and I heard one gentleman say, the persons who are going to the boardroom, if I don't go and clean up, paraphrasing him, then they can't function. And he understands the value of his job and therefore will do it to the best of his ability. So we need to ensure that persons understand the target and therefore will work in that stead. And the final area, well, two areas, is that smart, it needs to be result-based. People need to work towards certain results and must be time-based. And as I say time-based, I'm not going to spend much more time because I understand that there are other things to be said. And therefore, I want to say that it has been a very good platform, and we look forward to several more of this kind of platform. And the tripartite involvement is very critical. I heard Tamar say that there will be something where the worker representatives will also be able to express their views on these topics, and we look forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gillian. You see what I spoke about, I saved the best for last. I could actually drop the mic right now. So much words of wisdom spoken there, Gillian, and you can hear the years of experience coming out. And one of the things you mentioned was that client focus. That's even more critical now. And this is something that the Japanese have mastered. And during my time in Japan, and that was something that I saw coming out at the forefront, that everything is geared towards adding value to the customer. And even more so right now during this pandemic, it is important as organizations to really be listening and communicating with them to make sure we are attending to their needs and what they need at this time. And there's a term that is using a lot now calling pivot, that we have to pivot like how we used to play netball, and you have to pivot very quickly, right, to meet those needs and changes so we remain relevant and continue to add value to our customers. And she also spoke about talent mix and match, right? That's very, very important to ensure that our productivity levels are high. And so we want to thank Gillian, and a lot of food for thought in terms of rethinking how we do and how we are doing things right now, whether in our processes, our systems, or as individuals. And at this time, we will be taking some questions from the audience, and I've gotten a few, right? And I know I am coming back to Denique with the technology questions, so that she can share with our listeners some of those resources that are available to persons to build their digital capacity. So the first question is from Stacey-Ann, and she asks, will the government revise the Flexible Work Arrangement Act to streamline work from home in Jamaica? And I think that one will go right back to our dear Miss Gillian Corrodus.
Thank you very much. And I just want to thank the participant for that question, because the last meeting of the Labour Advisory Council, and Mr. Chen is here, he was very vocal on that area, so he may want to respond as well. The suggestion of the tripartite was that there needs to be a task force set up to look at some of these legislative amendments that are going to be needed. Because at the time, in 2014, when the Flexible Work Arrangements Act was contemplated, certainly a pandemic of this magnitude was never envisaged. And therefore, there are certain things that the legislation doesn't respond to in an overt manner. And one of remote work, or quote unquote working from home, and what are going to be the protocols, the guidelines. We have seen many things happening, but yes, there needs to be some kind of legislative response to it, and the ministry is ready for that kind of work, and we will be engaging the tripartite in that regard. I think Mr. Chen might want to weigh in as well.
All right, thanks, Gillian. Mr. Chen?
You know, one of my curses is a long memory. And Doug might not remember, but back in 1994, we were at a retreat together down on the North Coast. And that was where I first met Lloyd Goodley. And Lloyd, for the subsequent years, became my good pal. And it's sad to say that these are discussions that we have been having. 1994 is so long ago now, 26 years, that I'm aware of. And I'm sure those discussions were taking place long before then. You know, I'm a great proponent in social dialogue, and this is something that has to be in the forefront of the social dialogue and social partnership in terms of getting it implemented. Because I think we have reached a stage in Jamaica more, and I can speak of quite a few Caribbean jurisdictions, which I'm quite familiar with also, that in terms of the thinking and the readiness to accept, I think Jamaica is at a point now where we can really move this thing forward very, very rapidly. Because there are sectors, whether we have legislation or not, you know, John Lennon famously said that life is what really happens while we're busy making other plans. That there are sectors in Jamaica, whether they had legislation or not, which have already adopted flexible work. I mean, we talk about 300,000 people in the hospitality sector, in the tourism sector. I mean, the majority of tourism workers are already working on some sort of flexible work arrangement, whether it is formalized in law or not, it is the reality. The BPO sector, which now employs close to 40,000 people, I don't know what it will be post-COVID, but which offers the greatest opportunity for accelerated employment in Jamaica, pretty much operates on that pretty flexible arrangement. And the fact is that going forward in the future, even we have to have a bigger discussion on even the nature of work, because many people will be own accounts. If we are going to be digital natives in the fourth industrial revolution, many of our people, generations to come, will be working online and not even leaving home, tutoring at home, spending more family time and working online. The fact is that it has to be in the context too of something that has evolved beyond the old employer-employee relationship to a point where the state will now have to talk about the social safety net and what's the guaranteed minimum standards below which everybody can't fall. So we're talking now about some sort of national unemployment insurance, a more robust public health care, and eventually, if we're rich enough, even a minimum guaranteed income from the state. And the state in this case being the collective, every citizen contributing to a pool that will allow for new forms of work in the future that are not disadvantaged. So I say all this to say, I don't think it's for a lack of acceptance. It's just getting it on the legislative agenda in a way that is relevant, that we don't do it in a year or 2 years and it suddenly becomes obsolete the minute the ink dries after it comes out of Garden House. It needs more than just a legislation. It needs a process that we can ensure that our labor arrangements are relevant and competitive. Let me put it in that way. Thank you
for that. So it's a process, so it doesn't have an end. We're continuously improving and meeting the challenges that presents itself at any given time. Thank you so much for that. And at this time, I'm going to ask Denique to come back in and share with our audience listening and watching us today on some of those practical tools. Denique?
Yes. Okay, so some of these tools that we can use, I think a number of people might be familiar with things like Coursera, and the other one is slipping my mind right now, but I will continue. Sorry, what was that?
Udemy? Yeah, Coursera, Udemy.
Yes, Coursera, Udemy, and these are their platforms in their own right. Another one too that's really good, because I find that the things on Coursera and Udemy tend to maybe work best if you've already completed high school and university. And by the way, like some of these courses here can also be really good if you are just maybe thinking of switching careers, which might happen quite a lot these days. And you want to say, well, what is this really about? Is this something I should invest in? So these courses are really good for that kind of exploration too. But let's say, for instance, that maybe they're more foundational skills that you want to have, right? Because even a part of being able to use technology very well is being able to just use spoken written languages very well and math very well, especially if we look at the fact that with technology, it's not just about being able to use a tool like a computer or a phone or a platform like say YouTube or some other kind of, like say YouTube or Facebook, or even more corporate applications like we're now seeing Zoom and Asana, but Microsoft Office, for instance. But also you would also want to be able to use data very well, right? Quantitative as well as qualitative. So the quantitative, the things that deal with the numbers, the things that you can directly measure, right? You want to make sure that your math skills are on point with that, and even maybe your visual skills as well. And so there are, if you need to bring your math skills up to date, you can use a resource like Khan Academy. That's KHAN. I think that's really good. It does bring you right up through the levels. So don't think that you need to be a maths brain or something in order to use those kinds of resources. Otherwise too, you can find resources like these on YouTube. So for instance, there are universities like MIT and so on that actually upload entire courses onto YouTube. So if you're looking for something more technical, you can also do that as well. Again, with the math and with things like visual design, because even if we're using computers and so on, we want to be able to communicate things visually, like this data. We don't necessarily want to just talk about things as numbers. Sometimes it's easier for us to see the patterns, like in the graphs and so on that Mr. Ivey had in his presentation. You want to know how to be able to do those kinds of things well. And there are lots of graphic design resources that you can find on YouTube. So apart from that too, having mentioned data, I think another good resource for digital literacy, and yes, this is a project that SlashRoots is involved in, but it is very relevant, and that is the Caribbean School of Data. And that's especially if you're someone who, especially for young people who maybe have not gone on to university, or maybe they're not involved in training or a job right now, this is a very good resource for allowing you to move beyond just the consumption part of your of using your devices and so on, and getting familiar with being able to work with data and that sort of thing. So Caribbean School of Data, it's now being funded by Google and it's being rolled out throughout the Caribbean. So it's not just in Jamaica. That's also a good thing to look up and get involved in. If you want to do something directly on your smartphone, say you actually want to learn how to code. So you want to learn, I don't want to just be a great user, and make things, but I want to actually build these applications and so on. You might want to learn how to code, right? How to actually give these computers the instructions in a language that they understand. And sometimes there are very gentle ways to get into that. So there is an app, for instance, on Android, I think, called Grasshopper, that teaches you how to code in a very gentle way. It's really almost like doing a game. And I'm sure there are several others. If you were to just go to the App Store on your phone and look up, how to code, you might find, different approaches, whether you're looking for something a little bit more serious or you're looking for something that's a little bit more gentle, that's more game-like, that's maybe teaching you how to think like a coder as well, and not just, steps to do. So you fully, understand what it is that you're getting into. And I do remember Mr. Orane mentioning earlier, listening to podcasts. I was actually shocked when you gave that statistic that maybe about 1 in 50 listen to podcasts. I couldn't believe it, because they're such a wealth of information, even when they're just being entertaining. And there are, for instance, you can listen to ones that will just open you up to ideas, but I also like to listen to how the podcasts are presented as a way of understanding what it's like to communicate ideas in a very compelling way, which is also something you'd want to do if you're going to be looking at, well, how can I kind of inspire innovation in my colleagues and so on. And so I like podcasts, for instance, like Radio Lab, and 99% Invisible. They cover a lot of different topics and they cover them in very engaging ways. Those, of course, are kind of foreign based. There's one that's Caribbean that I actually quite like, and I need to listen to more of it. But I believe, I don't want to get title wrong, but I believe it is a lawyer and a policy analyst walk into a bar. It's two Caribbean men, I can't remember exactly which islands they come from, but they do talk about Caribbean regional topics. And it's very good to get you exposed to maybe the kinds of trends and the kinds of maybe problems that you didn't realize that you probably have the skill set, or maybe your organization could potentially take advantage of if you're looking for more ways to, be productive. So I think I might stop there.
Wow,
but those are some.
We could talk for days, right? Each panelist that we have here, we could have a full day with them and still not even scratch the surface. But thank you, Denique. A lot of good tips right there. And I'm sure our listeners are very appreciative for those and will be looking them up. But absolutely, I have found, podcasts and very, very informative. The exposure and the learnings are phenomenal. I would encourage persons to really, really search out the ones that suit you. And that market is exploding right now, hugely, especially since the pandemic. So, each person has a different style, a different vibe. We even have Jamaicans out here that can help you to launch your own podcast if you're interested. And as it relates to learning, Google has also expanded in terms of the learning platforms on Google. And I think even a friend of mine who lives in Canada, his 10-year-old daughter was so bored, yes, that she ended up getting a certification in digital marketing because she was bored from Google. So she was bored with school and was able to go online with the help of her father, get that certification. Sir Orane, you're saying something?
Yes, before you close, and we're getting close to midday, I wanted to make some points for the future then.
Yes, man, we're going right there.
Okay.
Well, you want to start us off?
So
because I'm going to give about 40 seconds to each panel.
Okay, well, I'll do it very quickly. So the first one is 2 points for leaders. The first one is what gets measured gets done. So you choose a simple measure, no matter how imperfect it is, and use it rather than waiting forever to create a complicated measure that looks great, but nobody understands it. And that's what we had done in GraceKennedy. We actually use US dollars profit per permanent employee in order to measure productivity. You could argue with it, but it was easy to understand. The second one is that we need to bury Jamaica time. This idea, we'll talk about it and then we leave and we don't do anything about it. But we need to say to our peers and others who work with, look, I'm not accepting the fact that you don't do things on time. You promise to do something, you don't do it, and we start late. Rule following is not optional in a productive society. In our society, there's a view, you follow the rules that you choose to, and you ignore the ones you don't want to follow. And we as leaders need to say, look, we want to be fair to everybody, and everybody follows it. The next one is I want to make a recommendation for all of you at the Jamaica Productivity Center. I'd like to see within the next year that you become missionaries for productivity. I go on YouTube and you will have tens of thousands of followers on your YouTube channel where you're talking about productivity. We need to make productivity exciting. Those of you, Wayne, you know some dancehall artists. Can you ask them how to make productivity a topic that what people want to sing Jay about?
And dance too.
And dance.
I'll do a bit of preaching there.
Yes, but I mean, I'll give you an example. Bank of Jamaica is doing it, in my opinion, very successfully. And around the world, people are amazed at using Bank of Jamaica as an example of how to communicate effectively with a wide cross-section of people. And then this is the final one. And this is I put this out to our younger generation. I know very well a serial entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. His name is Lloyd Carney. He went to Woolmar's. He said, Doug, I know the people who started WhatsApp. There are 4 of them. They resigned from Yahoo. They were not techies. And they said, scratched their heads and said, what do people want in this world? And they said, they want to make the free text messages. So they went and employed some techies in Eastern Europe and paid them by the hour, created WhatsApp. And it has been a wild success. All of us use WhatsApp. And then the 4 of them sold it to Facebook for billions of dollars. Here is what Lloyd said. WhatsApp could have been created by 4 Jamaicans living in Jamaica. There's no reason why it couldn't have happened, because Jamaica was one of the first early adopters of WhatsApp. As you know, because you talk to our relatives in the United States and say, are you using WhatsApp? And they look kind of baffled. But of course, the reason is with their phone plans, they get text messages for free, so they don't need to. But the point I'm making is there are a lot of innovations we can do right here. And it's really a matter about self-confidence to believe that we have the ability to do it ourselves. So encouraging the younger generation to go out and innovate, not be afraid of failure. If you succeed, great. If you fail, it's a victory for the fact that you are courageous enough to try and it didn't work. So you'll be able to do it better the next time around. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Orane. We have 1 minute left to noon. Can I get just some 15-second final comments, Wendel, and then Gillian, Mr. Chen, quickly, for our listeners. Final comments, Wendel.
So my final comment is that basically what we should do is just scan the horizon, especially in the context of the fourth industrial revolution, and see what opportunities are there that we can use to actually increase our productivity and also other things. For example, new businesses, new things.
Thank you, Wendel. Gillian, how can they don't give you a lot of work right now?
Okay, well, I just want to say that certain things are changing and have changed. What we call workplace is soon going to be replaced by place of work because the physical space that we report to might be changing shortly. Now, we have to remember one very important thing as we try to work smart, not as hard, but smarter, is that work-life balance is extremely important, and people value time over money in many instances and want jobs that allow them the flexibility of work in a way that they can have recreation, attention to health and family, especially where they have small children and the elderly. So we have to balance the work, have to balance the thing, maintain the balance. Thanks.
Thank you, Gillian. Denique?
Yeah, so one thing I would say is to remember that what you have learned is transferable, right? Sometimes we think that we're very much stuck to maybe what we formerly did in school or even just what our job currently describes. But remember that the skills that you need to do that can sometimes be applied very effectively, sometimes more effectively in another area. And often that's where innovation happens. When you take the skills, the mindsets, the approaches, techniques sometimes that are learned in one subject and apply them to another, which means you don't necessarily have to be super technical in order to be able to innovate, right?
Thank you. Thank you very much for that tip. And last but not least, Mr. Wayne Chen.
It's a wonderful time to be alive. I mean, in the old days, I had to find my Encyclopedia Britannica and find myself in the library. We have so much knowledge at our fingertips, but what we need is a thirst for knowledge, a thirst for continuous improvement. Kaizen, Tamar, that's our Japanese friend over here. The cultures and societies that are getting ahead are the societies that are hungry to improve. We have to create that hunger and desire in ourselves to continuously improve as managers, as leaders, as entrepreneurs, as workers, as citizens. There are too many resources at our fingertips not to take advantage.
Thank you so much. Wow. I'm almost sad that we have come to the end of our session today, but I mean, such a rich discussion, and this conversation will indeed be continued. We have so much food for thought here, and I do agree with you, Mr. Orane, in terms of us having, making productivity exciting and for persons to really join that movement and that have that thirst for improvement. And so we do have a competition online, and we're encouraging listeners to log in and share with us how you are working smarter and not harder. And we have our sponsors who are also working to improve their productivity, who are sponsoring gifts locally, and two persons we have a tenure and novelty gimmick. So please log in and share with us what you have been doing. We also have a survey that will help to measure what is really happening in this productivity sphere right now. So go to our website and our pages and please participate so that we can then feed the discussion going into the next forum. So thanks again to all of you for logging in, our listeners, our sponsors, the GIS for streaming, Power 106 for also streaming through radio. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen listening for your attendance, participation, and contribution. Our ambassadors for productivity that are listening in, and if you are not one already, I'm sure you are one now. This really indicates that that persons recognize that productivity is the way that we're going to really increase our competitiveness and economic growth. And it's really heartwarming to see it here, because this will help to improve the standard of living, help job creation. So let's continue to do our part to improve. It's our business. you know, walk with everybody, continue to stay safe and well as we improve and thrive through this time. Thank you so much and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
All the best, folks. And thanks again, Tamar. Thanks to the JPC.
It's our pleasure.